Ahoy hoy, I'm Planet Walk, and in all my time on debunking flat earthers on YouTube, there's actually one flat earther that I haven't made a video about. Well, actually there's a couple, but today I'm talking about Mark Sargent. There is also Rob Skeeber, but I don't think that I should make a video on him given that he hasn't done anything in a while. But Mark Sargent would probably have to be one of the biggest active flat earthers at the moment. So it's surprising that I haven't made a video on him. Although there was a video that I was supposed to have him in over a year ago that never actually got made. But I still have the video that he gave me.
Hello, I am Mark Sargent, and I am responding to the question, or more of a statement.
The goal for the video was to have a whole lot of different people reading comments, but a lot of people didn't get back to me. I'll try it again when I get to 20,000 subscribers. And of course I'll include more of the Mark Sargent video as well. But anyway, for today we will be debunking Mark Sargent's Flat Earth clues. Yes, we are going way back, right to the start of the modern Flat Earth. Why would you do this, you may be asking? Isn't there newer Flat Earth videos? Well, yeah, but we gotta remember how this all started. Many people have been dragged into Flat Earth by two main things, that being Mark Sargent's Flat Earth clues and Eric Dubay's 200 proofs. I suppose there is a third thing Flat Earth Facebook means, but that's Facebook's problem. So because this is what a lot of people got into Flat Earth because of, let's go ahead and revisit it. I mean, technically I'm not revisiting it because I haven't seen it before, but for everyone else who has seen it, let's revisit it.
Flat Earth Clues Part 1, The Empty Theater. This is part of a series of clues that can help you get your head around both the design of the flat Earth system we live in and who has been involved in the deception to hide it from you.
Was it Ryan? Has he been hiding the Flat Earth from me all this time? I've been asking him for a snow globe for ages, but he just won't give one to me.
The clue you have to look at is built upon another conspiracy that has been around for decades, namely the space program. Most of those watching this are aware of the varying theories revolving around NASA, the Apollo program, the space shuttle, the International Space Station, and so on.
Well, if you're referring to what I think that you're referring to, then it's not really a theory, it's more of a hypothesis. That's because the evidence for these is very tenuous and breaks down under any scrutiny. My next video, in fact, is about someone who went ahead and looked at footage from the moon and tried to point out why it was fake. And all of the arguments that they make ignore the evidence for the moon landing being real. Most of the arguments themselves are also pretty bad, so make sure you catch that video when it comes out.
The clue itself isn't based on one of these highly debated topics, but the lack of one. More specifically, motion pictures based on actual events.
Why do so many conspiracy theorists talk about movies? A lot of movies are just made for people's entertainment. Some are meant to be educational, but conspiracy theorists generally don't reference those ones.
To begin, think of all the movies involving space travel that you've seen in your lifetime. You'll start with the obvious: Star Wars, Star Trek, Alien, just to name a few. In fact, if you go through your own personal list, you could probably come up with over 100 different off-world movies without breaking much of a sweat. That part is easy. For the second group, try to come up with space movies that aren't fantasy-based. You'll get a list that has Red Planet, Gravity, Mission to Mars, 2001, things like that. These films will usually take on a not-so-distant future theme, and where we could be down the road. And it's still a pretty good-sized list. These first two groups of films are encouraged by the authority, because they reinforce the globe model through assumption.
Well, the reason why these films are generally encouraged, or the reason why any film is encouraged, is because they make money. That is why the list of fantasy films is far larger than the list of films that are at least somewhat plausible. That's also why there's so many superhero films, because people will go and watch them. If nobody watched superhero films, then they'd stop making them. As I have said plenty of times before, and will keep on continuing to say, you do not need a conspiracy to explain that.
The entertainment system demands that the globe view and solar system concept is a given. Therefore, the actual worldview must also be true. Or to put it another way, if you're using your suspension of disbelief as you watch a movie like, say, Gravity, then subconsciously you're reinforcing the movie right on top of the real world.
Well, the reason why all these movies have planets being spheres and not flat plains is because Earth is a sphere. Do you think that the next big movie that takes place in space will really decide, let's make Earth be a flat plane? No, they're going to make Earth be a sphere. Although, they might have a planet be a flat plane. I'm not completely up to date with everything that happens in Marvel Comics, so there might be flat planes in there that aren't actually Asgard. And yes, that is a point to consider. In Marvel movies, Asgard is literally a flat plane. So it's not like there's no flat planes that exist in fantasy movies, because the Thor movies have flat planes.
The more of these movies you watch and enjoy, the more the lines blur between what you want to believe and what you actually know.
I do think that most people have the ability to distinguish fact from fiction. It actually seems to be conspiracy theorists that have a hard time distinguishing the two.
Watch enough movies about Mars, and you will be less astonished when NASA announces an actual mission to Mars. Same with the moon, other solar systems, and so on.
This is very much like saying, watch enough movies about magic, and you'll be less astonished when they say that magic actually exists. If someone could actually go ahead and give scientific evidence that magic exists, then I would be very, very surprised. In fact, I was very surprised when I saw a video where someone claimed James Randi's $1 million challenge. That wasn't until I found out the date. In my defense, the video was not posted on April 1st, so I couldn't know the date that the video was actually recorded.
Releasing the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey in 1968, right before the actual moon missions, was no accident. It took the greatest director of all time 5 years to make, and several people who saw the theater screenings claimed that many military groups were listed in the credits, only to be removed years later.
So I cannot find any evidence that this is the case. And besides, if they were trying to keep it a secret, then why would they put military groups in the credits in the first place?
Now you are aware of the first two groups of space films. There are those that contain generous amounts of fantasy, and those who try to paint our near future. These two groups are easy to find. The third group is a challenge, and again, that's where things get interesting. The moon missions concluded in 1972, and even though it's still considered the greatest achievement by mankind, no fact-based movies were made regarding it until The Right Stuff was released in 1983.
Unless, of course, you ignore Moonwalk 1, a feature-length documentary from 1970. Although here, Mark might be talking more about movies more along the lines of The Wolf of Wall Street. Of course, movies like that tend to be more of a dramatic reenactment of what happened. But my question would be, why would you need a dramatic reenactment of what happened? Who's asking for that? When making dramas, you do need to consider things like story structure, and not everything fits neatly into a story structure that people are going to enjoy. There are also plenty of other factors that go into this, like maybe they just didn't want to make a movie like that.
Now you might say that it had only been 11 years, and maybe it was tough to get the rights, and so on. But that's not what made the film interesting. The movie ran extremely long for 1983, coming in at 3 hours and 12 minutes. It was an exhaustive look at the astronaut selection process, the competition, and the training facility itself. But when the credits rolled 3 hours later, chronologically, they had only gotten to the low Earth orbit missions. Just for fun, Google The Right Stuff movie and see how many spacecraft you can find.
So I don't know much about the movie, and I don't know much about the book that it was based on, but I do know that the movie was based on a book. Now, if the book didn't touch on the moon landings, then the movie isn't going to touch on the moon landings either. Now, I don't actually know of whether the book touches on the moon landings or not, but from what I've read of it, it might not. The book itself does seem to focus more on the astronauts, and so it makes sense that the movie would do the same thing.
It won 4 Academy Awards and did a great job at the box office, but the Apollo missions were never touched. The only other major motion picture that involved the actual moon program was Apollo 13 in 1995, a full 12 years later. Apollo 13 only covered a single moon orbit and no landing or close-up reference to the previous missions below them. And after 1995, that was it. Nothing.
So there have been movies about the actual moon landing, but these came out after this video, so we can give him a pass on that. But if we're including documentaries, then he's wrong. If we're not including documentaries, I don't see why he would want a dramatised version of it. Whether or not a film is made doesn't change whether it actually happened or not.
Now, to be fair, there was a TV miniseries in 1998 covering the subject. It was produced by Tom Hanks, who got involved after starring in Apollo 13. There has been no professional production of any kind since then.
Well, it's not like they're going to go ahead and make a movie or TV series about this every 5 years. There needs to be a market for this kind of stuff, and if there is no obvious market, then they're not going to make a movie about it.
If Hollywood makes a movie about the moon landings, and it's indistinguishable from the real thing, then how do you know which is real? It raises some subtle questions involving stage technique and how long they've been in place. If Hollywood could fake it now, then when did they first have the ability?
Well, that depends on how they fake it. If they use something like CGI, then that hasn't been around for a very long time. And then there's the question of, if they do film it without CGI, would it look exactly the same? Because a lot of the time, to an average person, everything will just look fine. But to someone that's looking for discrepancies, they might be able to find them. And considering that Hollywood often goes for hyperrealism rather than realism, there will probably be some discrepancies there.
There is one other movie which stands out, and I mention it because I can't believe it ever got made, is Capricorn 1. The film's plot involved the faking of a Mars mission and how it could be accomplished. In short, it's part of the Conspiracy World Bible. I highly recommend it, and the link is below.
So obviously this movie doesn't actually mean anything, because it is a fictional movie. And just because in a movie they were able to fake something, doesn't mean that that was able to be done in real life. Quite often movies don't actually have to justify everything, so they can get away with quite a lot. So that is the first supposed flat earth clue, and I did not realise it was that bad. I thought that it would have some of the standard flat earth talking points like, oh, we see too far or something like that, but no, it was movies. Let's see if the second one is any better.
This clue revolves around one of the most remarkable men you may have never heard of, Richard E. Byrd, and his relationship with Antarctica and the secretive missions he carried out there until his dying day.
You know, Mark Sargent is really making it sound like this is some kind of romance novel, with his relationship with Antarctica and secret missions. Wonder where this romance novel is going to go.
Some of you have followed the legend of Richard Byrd through the Hollow Earth theory. We aren't going to be covering any Hollow Earth in this video, but instead focus on the man and his involvement with the South Pole.
Well, Hollow Earth doesn't really fit too well with Flat Earth, does it? Because with Hollow Earth, they still think the Earth is a sphere.
The governments of the United States and the world trusted his judgment and leadership, and took advantage of every chance they had to put him in charge of special missions. The first large-scale mission was an expedition to Antarctica in 1928. This was noteworthy because even though he had just flown over the North Pole in 1926, all expeditions from 1928 on were focused on the South.
Well, it does make sense. If he's been to the Arctic, why not send him to the Antarctic? He obviously has some kind of experience there, right? But I can see where this is heading. It's obviously going to mention things like Operation High Jump and imply that there is some kind of ice wall there. Is this really the kind of stuff that actually convinced people to become flat earthers?
His second Antarctic expedition ran from 1933 to 1935, and his third from 39 to 40. While in Antarctica, he was also an advisor for other countries who had their own expeditions, including England, France, Germany, and building off previous countries' expeditions from Belgium, Japan, and Sweden. He then helped lead U.S. Navy fleet operations in World War II, was present during the Japanese surrender in 1945, but then something strange happened. He went back to Antarctica.
Well, it's not really that strange when you think about it. He had been there plenty of times before, so he's the perfect candidate to send back there. And as Mark said, he was an advisor for other countries' expeditions, so he definitely knows quite a bit about the place.
Now, some of you aren't surprised because he'd been there since 1928. and I agree with you. It's the how that's interesting here.
I really don't see how this could be so strange, unless I've just completely forgotten something from all the Flurf videos.
His fourth trip to Antarctica wasn't an expedition. It was a military operation called Operation High Jump. Commanding an entire aircraft carrier group that included 13 support ships, Admiral Byrd led 4,700 men to the South Pole, for reasons that are still shrouded to this day.
So I called it, I just knew that he was going to bring up Operation High Jump, because they always do that when they talk about Admiral Byrd. But again, this is really nothing strange, because as Mark mentioned, he helped US Navy operations in World War II. And because Operation High Jump was a military operation, you obviously want to get someone who's familiar with both Antarctica and the military. Who better than Admiral Byrd? And also, the operation doesn't seem to be too shrouded in mystery. Sure, there will always be things that will be kept secret, but there are reports on this. There is a Wikipedia page as well.
Some say they were chasing the remaining Nazi fleet, even though Germany had surrendered a full year earlier. Others say there was a Nazi base established in Antarctica during the war, when Admiral Byrd was absent. None of these theories are important for this video.
No, I feel like if I got $1 every time Mark Sargent mentions something that isn't going to be important, I feel like I could make a lot of money off that. Of course, it feels like him just spouting ideas that some of his audience might resonate with. You know, he says something that a potential flat earther might find intriguing, and therefore that potential flat earther might be more likely to be swayed by his arguments. Because who's more likely to believe in flat earth? Obviously, the people that already hold conspiratorial views.
What we do know is that the US had sent an excessively large military force to the ice, all under the guise of peaceful intentions.
Yeah, of course the intentions are at least somewhat peaceful. What are they going to do there? Wage war against the penguins?
During this operation, Admiral Byrd told a Chile newspaper this: "The most important result of his observations and discoveries is the potential effect that they have in relation to the security of the United States. The fantastic speed in which the world is shrinking," recalled the Admiral, "is one of the most important lessons learned during his recent Antarctic exploration. I have to warn my compatriots that the time has ended when we were able to take refuge in our own isolation and rely on the certainty that the distances, the oceans, and the poles were a guarantee of safety."
So firstly, I don't think that he means that the world was literally shrinking. I think we can all agree that it would actually be pretty disastrous if it were shrinking. What I think he means there is how easy it is becoming for you to go from one place in the world to another place in the world. Us Kiwis have known this for ages, and we've been using it to frighten Australians by just flying a whole lot of us over there. It really does seem like that is the most logical explanation behind what he said.
After the operation, Admiral Byrd toured the States and gave interviews, the most interesting of which is a national television show in 1954 called The Longines Chronoscope. A horrible name, but a decent show. I've added a segment of it at the end of this video and linked it in the description. During this television interview, he first spoke of an area beyond the South Pole as large as the United States, which no one had set foot on yet.
So this is a claim that I've heard from flat earthers multiple times, and they make it out to seem like he's talking about lands beyond the ice wall. In reality, he's likely just talking about the other side of Antarctica. Because as it turns out, Antarctica is a pretty big place. It's a whole continent. And as it turns out, because it's a large continent that is pretty inhospitable to humans, not all of it had been explored. And that would be why there is land beyond the South Pole that no one's explored, because that land would just be the other side of Antarctica.
He then went on to say that there would probably be expeditions year after year because the US government had really become interested. The interviewers then probed as to why the interest in the South, when any perceived military threat from Russia, keep in mind this was 1954, would be from the North. He went on to say that it was the most valuable and important place in the world for science. It involved the future of the nation, an untouched reservoir of untapped resources, including coal, oil, minerals, and uranium.
So obviously all land has the potential to have natural resources. And this is what makes land so valuable at times, because if you have access to more land, then you have more access to natural resources. And if you're worried about a perceived threat, well, having more resources can help if that threat comes to fruition. If you're using things like tanks, you do need to keep them supplied, otherwise that could be a bit of a problem if they ran out of petrol, couldn't it?
He added that at the time of the interview, there were 7 nations currently engaged in Antarctica, including Russia, Australia, Argentina, Chile, and New Zealand.
Yep, we were there. We're trying to see if we could export some gumboots and kiwi fruit, but turns out that there's not much of a market there.
During the interview, the Admiral talked about planning the next military mission to Antarctica. It was called Operation Deep Freeze and ran from 1955 to 1956. The mission was completed, and he supposedly returned home. Now this is where you come in and say, so what? And normally I'd agree with you.
I mean, yeah, all you've said so far seems pretty par for the course when it comes to history. In fact, none of it really seems to imply the Earth being flat at all. Unless you misunderstand things, of course.
Except for what happened next. Nothing happened next. The missions just suddenly stopped, and that was it. No other expeditions, military or otherwise, were conducted on the continent. Ever.
So part of that will have to do with the fact that Antarctica is pretty inhospitable to humans. It's not an easy place to do anything. So when it comes to things like that, it could certainly be possible that some of the costs outweighed the benefits. But then there is another thing that I'm sure Mark is going to bring up, which is the Antarctic Treaty. And part of that did ban military activity in Antarctica to establish it as a scientific preserve.
Then a treaty was put in place banning any country from doing basically anything. The end.
Well, it doesn't ban everything. You can still do stuff in Antarctica, just as long as it's not military activity and you clean up after yourself.
And if you're wondering what you're missing, it's this. Admiral Byrd goes on television, says that this massive body of land, most of which sits on a plateau 2 miles high, is rich with every resource you could ever want, energy rich, pristine, with no indigenous population or plant life, and every country that has sent teams is ready to carve it up like a big turkey. Not to mention, there's an expanse of land larger than the United States they haven't even looked at yet. And out of the blue, everyone just calls the whole thing off? There are no environmentalists in 1959. This is land of diner food and 20-cent gas.
But there were people that were anti-war, and as always, geopolitics will play a part in things like treaties. Because remember, at the time, there were quite a few tensions between the US and the Soviet Union. If a full-on war broke out between the US and the Soviet Union, then having to support troops in Antarctica, that would have been difficult for both sides. So it would have actually been mutually beneficial for both of them to agree to not have any military activity there. He's also wrong about there being no environmentalists in the 1950s, because during the 1950s, smog was killing people. And obviously, when people are dying, people want to do something about it. There is also the fact that Antarctica had helped with our scientific understanding, so it does make sense to preserve it.
The dollar value of the initial resources find would have fueled armies of greedy companies. So what happened? They found the edge, that's what. And the last thing they were going to do was let unsupervised companies near it, regardless of the money.
So that really does sound like a big stretch. He's saying that the only reason for this is because of the edge. An edge that may not even exist, because for there to be an edge, the Earth has to be flat. You know, it couldn't be that it's just in everybody's best interests to not have a war in Antarctica and to keep it pristine.
Even if it was hundreds of miles away, you couldn't allow resource corporations even into a safe area, and then years down the road as they expanded, tell them, oh, sorry, you can't go beyond this point. When the companies would ask why, what would you tell them?
It's more of a thing of, if you're going to try and preserve Antarctica, why would you allow mining or anything in a certain part of Antarctica? It doesn't make much sense. It'd be like saying, yeah, we want to protect Antarctica, except for this one little part right here.
And now the interior of Antarctica is off limits, with no revisions until the year 2041. You can take tours of the outer islands, but there is a hidden line, enforced by the military that you will not be able to cross.
Huh, I must have missed the part where they have military personnel in Antarctica. Because last I checked, the Antarctic Treaty says that there is no military activity allowed in Antarctica. Also, you can go to various places in Antarctica. It's just a matter of getting there. Like if I was really determined to go to Antarctica, I could go to Scott Base or one of the other bases in Antarctica.
Because the interior is actually the exterior edge. It's there, it's hidden, and it's protected. The Earth you live on is flat. So do some of your own research and ask questions.
So I have done my own research, and I have asked questions, and I did not reach the conclusion that the Earth is flat. I came to the conclusion that Earth being a globe best fits what I observe in reality. During the summer, the sun rises somewhere in the southeast, then heads north, and then sets somewhere in the southwest. If the Earth were flat as people like Mark Sargent describes, then this would not be possible. But I observe it every summer. So yeah, those were the two first flat Earth clues, and I don't see how they're convincing to anyone really. Maybe if you just turn off your brain then it might, but that's not something that I really like doing. But anyway, I've had enough of Mark Sargent for today. If you want me to take on more of his clues, make sure you let me know in the comment section, and be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you liked this video. I'm gonna go question other people's sanity and wonder how we actually ended up with flat earthers in the first place. So I will see you in the next video. Between you and me, thank you for watching.